What's the point of money? Not how to earn it, not how to invest it, not how to save more of it. What's the actual point? Because if we're honest, most people spend years trying to get more money without ever stopping to ask what they want money to do for them once they have it. And that can create a weird trap. You can spend your whole life chasing money only to realize you were chasing the wrong thing. Well, today's guest is one of the few people I know who can take a question like that and completely change how you think about it. Morgan Housel became one of the most influential voices in personal finance with his amazing book, The Psychology of Money. But his newest project tackles something we don't talk about enough: spending. Not the mechanics of spending, the psychology of spending. Why some people with very little money seem perfectly content, and why some people with enormous wealth never seem satisfied. Why admiration and envy aren't the same thing, and why the people who appear rich are often very different from the people who actually are. And stackers, I love this conversation because it isn't really about money, is it? It's about happiness. It's about contentment. It's about figuring out what role money should play in your life before money starts making those decisions for you. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. We spend a lot of time here in Mom's Basement helping people build wealth, but more importantly, helping people build a life they're excited to live. And if that sounds like your kind of conversation, subscribe to the channel and join us. And if you've ever caught yourself wondering whether you're chasing money or chasing what you hope money will do for your life, well, hit that like button because it helps other YouTubers share conversations like this with more people. Before we jump in, by the way, we put together a free cheat sheet from today's discussion, so you can just sit back and pay attention because Morgan drops insight after insight after insight. And instead of trying to scribble notes while you're listening, just grab our summary and action guide at stackingbenjamins.com/cheat sheet. That's enough from me. It's time for one of my favorite thinkers in personal finance to head downstairs to Mom's Basement. Morgan Housel is here. I'm super happy this gentleman is coming down the stairs to Mom's Basement. It's Morgan Housel. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And you're a guy who I've read and seen so much. I feel like I know you. It's one of these parasocial relationships, Morgan, that we often have with our stackers. I know enough about you and your work that you choose words very carefully. And you called the book, your new project, The Art of Spending Money. It's not the science of spending money. It's not the strategy, but the art. Why that word? Why is that word so important?
Well, I think there's two ways to think about this. One is I easily could have called it The Psychology of Spending Money, which is really what the book is. And it's not the strategy of spending money. It's not a lecture on how to spend money. It's what is going through your head when you are thinking about these topics. The psychology of envy, the psychology of greed, the psychology of contentment and happiness is really what this book is about. It is not called the science of spending money because I don't think such a thing exists. I don't think there is a science of spending money because in a science, there really has to be kind of a formula that works for me and you at the same time. And the truth is we are different people and everyone is different from one another, different generations, different cultures, different risk tolerances, different family situations, different emotional scars that we all bring with us from the past that shape our current desires and our current goals and whatnot. And so the idea that it is an art and not a science, I think this is a very imperfect analogy, but the best analogy that I can think of what it is like is your taste in food. There is no science of the taste in food. You might like Mexican food and I might say, no, Italian is much better. In real world, I absolutely despise seafood. Anything that's been submerged in water will not go down my throat. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if you and most people listening to this think that's crazy. But the truth is, like, look, we're all different. We're all very different. There's no science to this. Whatever works for you is what's going to work for you. And I think the idea of not just how we spend, but actually how we earn and save and invest our money fall into that category as well. It's not a science. It's an art.
Which means it makes it hard to create a set of rules. I mean, they're truly then, by definition then, Morgan, I think there'd be no rules to follow as much as there's kind of guidelines and markers and maybe a rainbow at the end of the horizon we're looking at.
Yeah, I think that tends to be true. And now look, there are some rules of being reasonable within it. And so if you are investing, you need to understand the math behind compounding. You need to understand the risk of debt and liquidation. Sure. Those are universal between you and I. And so, but the idea of the psychology of your risk tolerance, that's going to be different from person to person. And so there are guideposts that are universal that you need to understand. And that's where financial education really comes into play and that kind of thing. But the idea that we are all different creatures within those guidelines is one of the most overlooked parts of finance, I think.
You write that you worked as a valet at a high-end hotel. I'm very curious about that. Was that a good time?
Oh my gosh. I cannot exaggerate the extent to which that was the coolest job a 19-year-old could have. I was a valet for all 4 years during college at a 5-star hotel in Los Angeles. And this was kind of just before the housing bubble burst in 2007, 2008. And so there was so much fake money flowing around Los Angeles, which is already a fake city to begin with in terms of its material aspirations and showing off whatnot. And so you take the fake performative culture of Los Angeles, and then you dump $1 trillion of subprime money onto this. It was a crazy time. And then, so as a 19-year-old, I was driving all these Ferraris and Bentleys and Rolls-Royces, 90% of which
tough.
I'm sure were just leased. And we're doing it in 80 degrees sunny weather. It was the coolest job ever. A lot of it was because, and this is where I truly learned about so much of this stuff, I got to observe in a very fine magnifying glass the psychology of rich people, and not just rich people, but like performative rich people who were taking their dates out to dinner at this hotel and, trying to show off their car in the front of the area. And so I feel like I learned so much about it back then because in my little 19-year-old pea brain, I had these aspirations to be a rich person one day too. And in my naive thinking, I just kind of thought like, oh, one day I'll have a Ferrari and therefore I'll be happy. All my problems will go away. Everything will be great. Everybody will love me. That was the very naive leap that I took. But looking at so many of these people, not just some, but I would venture to say most, if not nearly all, they were not as happy or as successful as I thought they would be. Some of them would come in a $300,000 Lamborghini, and you get to know these people and you're like, he's actually not that successful. He just spends half of his income on a Lamborghini lease payment. There were so many of those elements that I got to see during those years that I learned a lot from.
It's interesting. I'm wondering, was there a correlation? Like the more performative the car was, the more, if it's the bright red, shiny Ferrari and the guy is immaculately dressed, he seemed to be less happy and less successful than the person that shows up in maybe a nice Buick? Or was there just no correlation at all? Like the Ferrari did not say anything to you about the person's general level of happiness in your short interaction with them?
I think people in flashy cars tend to separate into two groups. One is the car driver who wants to be seen. And the reason they own the Ferrari is because they want to turn heads and they want to show off in front of strangers. That's one group. The second group is one who truly loves the craft and the engineering of this beautiful machine. And they own it for the art. And I think the litmus test is saying, if you lived on a deserted island and nobody could see you, nobody could see your cars, your house, your clothes, how would you choose to live? And you would separate those two groups. If nobody could see your cars that you were driving, the people who own the cars for the craft and the engineering and the beauty of it would still drive it and still love it. And they just loved like polishing them in their garage every Sunday morning, that kind of thing. And then so I am not anti-spending in the slightest. And I love nice stuff. I love nice homes. I love nice cars. I love all of it. I like spending money on nice things, full stop. But you need to make sure you're owning it for the right reason. And it tends to be one of those two groups. Are you doing it because you truly love and enjoy this thing, whatever it might be, or because you think, usually in a fooling yourself way, that you are fostering and instilling some kind of admiration from strangers?
It's funny though, how addictive that admiration from strangers at first, maybe not addictive, but seductive it can be. I grew up in an auto family, but I've never been a car person, Morgan. But my roommate in college was really into Corvettes. And I was like, what a waste of time and what a waste of money. And then I rode in his Corvette. And then everybody was looking at me all the time. Yeah. Like even people that didn't care like me would glance at the person driving by because it was a cool car. It's very, very seductive. It was
but I would challenge you though, that they were not actually looking at you. They were looking at the car and imagining themselves being in your position. Now that's a very different thing. They weren't saying, wow, look at Joe. Joe's so man, he's so great. What they did is they said, if I was sitting in Joe's seat, people would be looking at me. And so even when people are paying attention to your car, your clothes, your house, 90% of the time, they're not actually paying attention to you. They are imagining themselves having that thing and dreaming about the attention that others would therefore give to them.
You write that in this project about Ben Franklin saying something to that extent, that people are envious of you. And if you can be I'm not going to get the words right because I don't have it right in front of me, but if you can be, I don't know what the phrase is, liked by people or honored by people without them feeling envious, that is truly a great place to be.
Yeah, it's very easy to mistake envy for admiration. And let's say you are in a position where people are like, wow, look at that house. Look at those clothes. Like, you're doing well for yourself. It's easy to think they admire you for it, but very often what they do is they envy you for it. And
Right.
Envy is not something you want to go through life minimizing the amount of people who are envious of you. And I'll give you one other valet story from the period of time. One of the actually richest people that came into the hotel all the time, he was a regular there, was I won't say his name, but a very successful clothing entrepreneur. And I know because it was a public company that he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars at the time. And he drove a modest Toyota pickup truck at the time. And I loved that this was actually one of the most successful people. He was not one of the people faking it with a lease payment. This guy was actually filthy rich. But I think he was so confident in himself and so confident in who he was and gained his admiration from his entrepreneurial abilities, from his kindness. He was the nicest, friendliest guy you could ever possibly meet. And that's what I admired him for. And I remember at the time, I think my initial knee-jerk reaction at the time was, dude, you have so much money. What are you driving this old pickup truck for? What is going on here? And as I gained a little bit more maturity, now I'm like 21 at this point, let's say, I kind of realized, like, I actually like you the best. I actually like you more than any of these people, because I think part of the reason was the people in the Rolls-Royces and the Bentley, I probably did envy them. Now that's not a brag. That's a character flaw of mine, but I think I did envy them. I think it was, oh, you think you're better than me? Like, I don't think you're better than me. You think you're better than my dad? I don't think you're better than my dad. And it was a sense of envy. But this other entrepreneur who drove the pickup, who was actually so successful, I was like, it's the opposite of envy. I'm like, I love this guy. He is so great. I have so much genuine admiration for him. And so I think usually envy happens not when somebody has nicer things than you or more money than you. It's when they have nicer things or more money, and rightly or wrongly, you tell yourself they didn't deserve it. You think you're working harder than me? I'm working hard too, but I can't afford that. That's where envy comes from. It's this feeling of unearned inferiority that you have towards others.
You wrote something else that really hit me, which was never make fun of how someone mispronounces a word because they learned it from reading.
Yeah.
You had read that somewhere, but the corollary that you bring up then is never make fun of how someone spends money because they learned it from living. Can you unpack that? Because I think a lot of our stackers, we all judge ourselves kind of harshly sometimes around the way we spend money.
Yeah, I think it's true that the way that you spend your money and save your money and invest your money tends to be a reflection of some deeply rooted personality characteristics that you have. Maybe there are scars from earlier in your life, scars where you're trying to make up for, scars that gave you a very high or very low risk tolerance, whatever it might be. You learned it from living. Now, that's not to say that people can't make terrible decisions. It's not to say that people should not be told they're making terrible decisions that they're going to regret. But when they are making those decisions of, here's how much money I'm going to spend, here's how much money I'm going to save, or the lack thereof, it makes sense to them in that moment. It's checking the boxes that they need in that moment. And I think that tends to be the case, that it's very common to look at somebody who is spending money differently than you are, or saving or investing differently than you are. They're either spending and saving way more or way less than you, and look at that and say, you're doing it wrong. I'm doing it right. You're doing it wrong. You're not spending enough. You're too frugal. You're not saving enough, whatever it might be. And I think a lot of where those feelings come from is that when you see people doing it differently than you can interpret that as a threat to your own decision making. Because if you're saving half your income and you see someone living paycheck to paycheck, right, when you look at them and say you're doing it wrong, I think it's not uncommon that actually what you're feeling is like, maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe they're living a great life that I'm missing out on. And you can respond to that with a lot of criticism and cynicism. And so, look, I know a lot of people make very bad financial decisions that they will end up regretting. And I think I have a pretty good radar at spotting those, but I still have to remind myself that person is not me. And maybe in their mind at that moment, it's the right thing for them to do, even if it would be the wrong thing for myself to do. I'll tell you a very quick little story here. It was actually before I was a valet. My very first job, I think I was 17. I was working at a ski resort in Lake Tahoe, and I had a coworker. He was probably 25, maybe 28, something like that. And he had $25,000 of credit card debt that he had racked up from going on these ski trips around the world. He had skied in France and Italy and Antarctica, and he had been everywhere on these like exotic ski trips, $25,000 in credit card debt. And I gave him so much grief for how stupid, how much of an imbecile he was for having all of this debt. And on a daily basis, I would criticize him and ridicule him. And then the tragic punchline here is about a decade later. So let's say he's maybe mid-30s. He died in a ski accident. And I remember how quickly my feelings what shifted towards, I'm so glad he took those ski trips while he could. I'm so glad he got to live this amazing life, did it. And now the takeaway is not that you and I should have a YOLO mentality and live like we're going to die tomorrow, because hopefully we're not going to. But I think the idea is there's no such thing, or it's never as simple, I would say, as live for today or save for tomorrow. The only thing you should think about is, what are you going to regret at some point in the future? And trying to minimize the number of regrets that you have. And I think about that a lot because I've been a big saver since I earned my first dollar when I was 17 at that ski resort. I've been a huge saver ever since. And I think a lot about the balance between, I hope I live for another 50 years, and B, I might not. You might not. Nobody knows what this can. So how do you balance regrets in a morbid kind of idea of, if you are on your deathbed tomorrow, looking back at your life, what would you regret? And a good philosophy foundation for life is trying to minimize those numbers of regrets. That's something that I think about a lot. But to bring that back to the point that you started with, when you see somebody spending more or less money than you, it actually might be wrong for you, but make perfect sense in their head at that moment.
It's funny. It strikes me as you're telling that story. You know, there's a lot of consternation in 2025 around the Bill Bengen new book and the idea that the 4% rule, it doesn't roll off the tongue anymore, Morgan, like it used to, the 5.25% rule, whatever it's going to be. But it always strikes me, especially as I'm looking through your book and I'm reading your book and I'm contemplating your words, that this idea of even starting with the 4% rule or the 5% rule might be a mistake. That if we begin with happiness and then see if that lodges inside a 4% or 5% of whatever we've done, might be a better way to even attack how we think about spending money during our retirement or our fire years.
Yeah, I do think there's something to be said that a lot of people will view those rules as guardrails around their happiness, that I want to spend as much money as I possibly can out of these assets. So it'd be great if it's 4%, but if you tell me it's 5%, that's going to be so much better because I'm going to be able to live a much better life.
Yeah, right.
I think to some extent that can be true. Everybody can spend more money in a way that's going to give them a better life. I think that tends to be universal. And if you can't, that's a personal flaw. You just haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Right.
But I do think there's, right. But yeah, exactly. But I do think there is something to be said that if you view your entire happiness as being constrained by how much money you're spending, that's a flaw as well. And I told the story in my latest book about my late grandmother-in-law. And for 30 years, she lived off of nothing but $1,800 a month in Social Security. Nothing else. She had no assets, no pension, just $1,800 a month, nothing else. Happiest woman you will ever meet. Totally content, totally happy, playing in her garden and going for walks and like bird watching. She always had a smile on her face. She's always laughing. She's always telling jokes. And so the takeaway there is not like, oh, you should do that too. But to me, the takeaway was it's absolutely possible to live an amazing life on very little money. It is within your control. And the idea that wealth is what you have minus what you want. And she had nothing and she wanted nothing else. And so that equation penciled out perfectly. There are also so many people that make $10 million a year, but they want 11. And those people are deficit in what they have. They wake up every morning feeling inadequate. And so I think there's no level to that. And so everybody can spend more money in a way that's going to give them a better life. But if you start out with, I can only have a good life if I can spend more money, that my happiness is constrained by how much money that I can spend, that's a problem as well.
Did you look into the research that a lot of people say is outdated, that, you know, there's a certain amount of money that you can spend up to that makes you happy. And then there's no happiness after that number. I know that's outdated. Have you seen any newer research on that?
Yeah, there's a study that I think kind of solves a lot of this problem of the decades long debate of does money bring happiness? Some studies would show yes, some studies would show no. I think some of the nuance behind it that's very important are the studies that say and show that if you are already a depressed, miserable, despondent, anxious person, earning more money is not going to do very much for you. Even earning lots of more money is not going to do much for you. But if you are already a happy, joyful, funny, content person, then earning more money will give you a much better life. It's like earning more or less money is just leverage in either direction for who you already were. And so a lot of that is it's too easy for us to assume that the solution for our anxiety and worry and self-doubt is more money. It's too easy that if you wake up every morning feeling like there's a little bit of a hole in your life, it's too easy to tell yourself, if only I had more money, then my problems would go away. And so that's what a lot of the research on that area would show is that, yes, there are studies that show people who earn more money are happier, but that's not necessarily causation. There's a correlation there for people who are already pretty content and happy with their life. My late grandmother-in-law on $1,800 a month, if she won the lottery, I think she would have been the happiest person to ever exist, the happiest person who had ever lived. But without naming names, we know some world famous billionaires who are in the news all the time, who, if you dig into their life, are not happy people. Elon Musk talked about this in an interview a couple of years ago. He said, you might think you want to be me, as in the richest man in the world, but he pointed to his temple and he said, it's a storm up here. It's a mess up here. Like, you do not want to be inside this head. And so I think it's too easy for us to assume that there is such a strong correlation between net worth and happiness, even if at the actual level, like, it's much more uncertain than that.
It's funny. It strikes me taking Elon Musk or even the people whose cars would show up when you were a valet, Morgan, and countering that to your grandmother. It makes me think of another great line that you found from somebody that's in your book, which was about, when you're showing off your house to somebody, show them the inside versus showing them the outside. The inside of your house being who you are. So if you start with trying to be a happier person versus more money, this is much more of a great place to start, I think, than starting with me trying to impress you.
And the inside of your house is showing off for the people that you let into your house, which is going to be your friends, your family, the people who you actually, the outside of your house. And we're just using this as a broad idea. The outside of your house is showing off to strangers who are going to drive past it and say, wow, I wonder who lives there. And so I think that's a pretty powerful idea. I desperately want and need the love and attention and admiration from about 6 people. My wife, my kids, my parents, 1 or 2 of my friends. And that's pretty much it. The people who come into my house, I want them to be proud of me, and I want to use my money to spend quality time with them. Absolutely. Like almost in a desperate way. But outside of that, of those 6 people, it drops off very dramatically. And the vast majority of people who are strangers, I couldn't care less. And the reason I couldn't care less is because they're not paying any attention to me to begin with.
Yeah.
There's a great phrase from the comic Jimmy Carr where he says, in your 20s, people worry about what other people think of you. In your 30s, you say, I don't care what anybody thinks of me. And in your 40s, you finally realize the truth, which was that nobody was thinking about you to begin with. I think there's a lot of truth to that the vast majority of people are just not paying any attention to you whatsoever. So make sure that if you are trying to use money to impress people, you're doing it for the very small number of people in your life whose love and attention and admiration you actually desire.
I love Jimmy Carr, and it just,
it's so good.
I was talking to a friend of mine about this earlier this week. So it's funny you bring him up. When did this dude become such a philosopher? Because I feel like in the last couple of years, he went from just being a comedian to just a guy who's just his life philosophy speaks so much to me.
Well, I think that's true for the vast majority of comedians. There's a really good podcast called Blocks with Neil Brennan. He's also a famous comedian. And what's great about he mostly has other comedians on. And what's great about it is it's almost like an unspoken rule that, like, hey, Jimmy Carr or Chris Rock, whoever's on the show, let's not be funny for the next hour. Let's talk philosophically about life. And what you see in there is that the best comedians in the world are absolutely brilliant philosophers. I think there's no exception to that. George Carlin was a brilliant philosopher. Chris Rock is a brilliant philosopher. Jerry Seinfeld, they're all brilliant philosophers. They spend their day thinking about life and the quirks of psychology, and then they deliver that in the best, funniest, most entertaining way possible.
I think about George Carlin, going back to something you and I were talking about earlier, and you actually include this in your new book, but it's a line that I've loved for a long time, which is anybody driving faster than you is a maniac. Anybody driving slower, we're always comparing ourselves to what other people are doing. I want to make sure we cover this before we say goodbye. You outline these 6 principles very early, I think maybe even in the introduction to this project, but let me focus on a few that really resonate. You say there's 2 ways to use money. Money's a tool you can use, but if you're not careful, it will use you. Can you unpack that for us? Because I felt like when you wrote that, like a bomb dropped in my lap.
Yeah, I think it's not uncommon. It's actually extremely common that money is not a tool that you are using. It is something that hijacked your personality, and it's controlling your desires. It's controlling your ambitions. It's controlling where you live, how you live, who you socialize with. It's like the puppet master controlling your life. I think that is a very common place to be in. And the people who I think use money the most effectively are ones who reject that. And they're like, I'm just going to be me. I'm who I am, and I'm going to use money as a tool to leverage who I am, but it's never going to define who I am.
And then the second is, of course, we've been talking a lot about this, but you say enduring happiness is found in contentment. So the happiest people with money are those who found a way to stop thinking about it. Your badass grandma, it sounds like, found a way to just stop thinking about money, Morgan.
Yeah, I don't think she thought about it any more than you and I would think about air, if that. Air is the most important thing in the world. You don't think about it ever. And that's actually an interesting analogy, because there are so many tech bros these days who want to maximize their breathing. And so they put tape over their mouth at night and whatnot. And so those people are they're so unsatisfied with the air that's coming in and out of their body. They want to maximize it more. What a miserable, miserable way to live. Just be happy. There's plenty of air. You don't need to maximize it. Just shut up and breathe. You can do it. And so I think that exists for money as well. The people who are constantly thinking about it and trying to maximize it are generally not the people who are the most content, the most happy with what they have. It's the people who are just like, oh, there's plenty of it. And when I need it, I use it for the things I love. But other than that, I spend my time thinking about my friends and my family and the sunset and the beautiful plants outside, like the things that actually make you happy. And money is there when you need it, but it's not a constant, ever-present thing.
I take everything that we've talked about in the last 25 minutes. And I also think about just you and I as people, as money geeks, our stackers as money geeks, right? We're people who like to think about money. But it seems to me that based on everything we've talked about then, so I'm like, so where's my win here? If I like talking about money, but it's not chasing money, what am I chasing, Morgan? Am I chasing systems? Maybe I'm trying to set up better systems by listening to Stacky Benjamins or by listening to Morgan Housel so that I can think about it less and just do it more efficiently.
Well, I'll give you 2 that are important to me. What I want out of money more than anything else is pretty much the only thing I want out of money is independence. I just want to live life on my terms, my way, not under anyone else's system, not chasing anyone else's goals. I want to be independent. That's the first thing. The second thing that I love out of money is I think money and finance and investing is a fascinating window into how people think and how people behave. You can learn so much about psychology and behavior and competition and sociology by studying money across culture, how I spend, how you spend, other people's ambitions and their aspirations. You can learn so much about people by studying money. Yes, you can also learn about people by studying religion and politics and sport, like all these other things. But money is like a shockingly clear window into people's psyches that I think is fascinating.
I do too.
That's my fascination with these two, with this topic. I want to be independent, and I'm fascinated with the window in which I can learn about other people and learn about myself while studying this.
Yeah, the whole behavioral aspect of this whole pursuit is unbelievable. I'll never get tired of it. The book is called The Art of Spending Money. It is available everywhere. And just a personal question, this is the psychology of money, Morgan. Which was more fun to write?
Oh, that's such a good question. They're very, I think the psychology of money, my first book was, it was a culmination of, at that point, have been about 15 years of heavy thinking about this topic.
I couldn't tell. It doesn't read like you'd heavily thought about it at all. For anybody that doesn't recognize the sarcasm there, that was very sarcastic.
But what's also true is that The Art of Spending Money is a book that I needed for myself. I needed to think about these topics in my own life because I felt like I was deficient in thinking about these. I could talk to you for hours about my investing philosophy, but 5 years ago, if you said, what is your spending philosophy? I would have drawn a blank. And so I needed this book for myself. And so it's meaningful for me for that reason.
Morgan, thank you so much for helping us get a little more philosophical about money. I appreciate the time so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, big thanks to Morgan for hanging out with us today. And honestly, I think the biggest lesson from this conversation is one that almost sounds too simple, doesn't it? Money is a tool. That's it. It's not a scoreboard, not a personality, not proof that you've won, just a tool. And the moment that you forget that, that tool starts using you. I kept thinking about Morgan's story working valet service in Los Angeles, watching people pull up in these Ferraris, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces, and some of them incredibly successful, some of them simply trying to look successful. And it reminds us something that's easy to forget. The goal isn't admiration. The goal isn't envy. The goal isn't getting strangers to notice you. The goal is building a life that feels right to you, a life where money helps you become more of who you already are, not a life where you're constantly trying to prove something to people who probably aren't thinking about you in the first place. And maybe that's why my favorite line from today's conversation wasn't about investing at all. It wasn't about spending. It wasn't even really about money. It was Morgan's reminder that wealth is what you have minus what you want. Because if you can learn to control what you want, everything changes. By the way, if you'd like our free cheat sheet with the biggest takeaways from today's conversation and talking points, things to think about, head to stackingbenjamins.com/cheat sheet. We'll also link to Morgan's new book, The Art of Spending Money, below. And I'd love to hear from you. Speaking of below in the comments, what's one purchase you've made that genuinely improved your life? Not impress somebody else. It wasn't something to just look good on social media. It actually make your life better. Make your life better, make your life better, right? Let's continue the conversation in the comments. If this is your first time hanging out with us, hit subscribe because every week we bring some of the smartest thinkers in money, investing, psychology, and life downstairs to Mom's basement. So together, we can all make better financial decisions without making money our entire personality. I'm Joe Saul-Sehy, and on behalf of the entire team here at Mom's Basement at Stacking Benjamins, let's keep on stacking. We'll see you next time.